All right, well, let's get started. Welcome, welcome to our special session with Brandee Nelson, who is joining us for our track 3, Path to Bronze. And this session really kicks off, you're all going to have some individual work with Brandee. So the way that we've structured this is you can follow up with Brandee and set up your time to be used anytime between now and the end of the local champions pilot. But the idea is that you each get 2 sessions with Brandee. Each session is an hour and a half. And as you'll see, Brandee is really our guru when it comes to engineering, planning, design, and she has extensive work with municipalities. And so today, Brandee's going to kind of break down what's a feasibility study? When should you start looking at grants? What is it? How do you interact with the community in planning and design? And so what we're hoping is that this kind of dovetails nicely with the work you're doing with Cornell, and that in your certification assessment, hopefully you're getting to the point where you have a handle on what's already been done and you're starting to look towards the future. What is most relevant for you? Maybe what's the low-hanging fruit? Maybe what are some bigger ticket items? How do you balance those? How do you juggle those? And especially for the bigger ticket items, there might be a sequence of steps there to build towards that, to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success in terms of the appropriate scale of a project, in terms of making sure you have buy-in from your town boards, and setting yourself up for getting grant money if you need to do so. So we're really excited to have Brandee here today. She's also going to do an Indigenous land acknowledgement for us. Brandee's actually located in Massachusetts, though she works out of the Rhinebeck-based Tighe Bond office. And so that's how I know Brandee, through our work here in Rhinebeck. And so she's been doing this. Brandee, you've been doing this for like 20 years or something, right? As a civil engineer, yeah. I'm working as a planner. And as I mentioned, extensive experience working with municipalities in particular, and with an emphasis now on green design and green infrastructure, and working with communities for planning for climate change. So Brandee, we're just thrilled to have you here today. Brandee's going to give a presentation, and then we as a group can do Q&A. Perhaps you already have some ideas for projects you want to chat about with Brandee, and we thought it would be great if anybody has those. We can hear about them as a group, just to start brainstorming together. So with that, I'll let Brandee take it away.
And I was hoping that we could just do a quick who's who, just so that I've been taking some notes and trying to learn more about your communities. And I'd love to just get to know each of you. Is it all right if we just take a minute, Vanessa, and do a quick introduction?
Yep. So why don't we start with Dan, and then you pick the next person after you, okay?
Okay, sure. So Dan Haas, I'm from Copake. So obviously I'm the Climate Smart Coordinator in Copake. We've got a climate task force that's basically came out of the Conservation Advisory Committee, which obviously I'm also a member of. So let's see, that's me pretty much. And how about Chow next?
So I'm Kathy Chow. Town of Northeast and Village of Millerton is in the middle of us. And we are Tighe Bond is actually doing the engineering for our sewer, which is going to transform the whole village. It's going to be a real watershed.
Yeah, no, it should be great.
But we have plenty of other challenges. A big long list for you.
Right.
Kristen.
I'm Kristen Shara from Hurley, which is in Ulster County near Kingston, and I'm the coordinator for the CSC task force, which is a part of our subcommittee of our CAC. And our town is also in a big sort of transformation cycle. We're redoing our comprehensive plan. We've got a zoning board task force. We've got a task force looking at our website. And so lots of stuff going on in Hurley right now.
Great. Kristen, who did you want to pick next?
Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina Bontak. I live in Germantown. Brandee, I've been hearing about you for a long time through Jen Crawford, who I grew up with. We used to work for Brandee. And yeah, so she pulled me into municipal work on our LWRS
awesome.
a few years ago. And now we're working on an LWRP. I'm on that committee as well. We don't have a CAC or anything like that in Germantown, but we, the waterfront committees are pretty environmentally focused. And that's kind of our big other project right now is the LWRP and working on some legislation around short-term rentals.
Okay.
Madeline.
Hello, I'm Madeline Russo. I'm in the town of Rochester, which is kind of equidistant between Kingston and Ellenville in Ulster County. I'm the chair of our Environmental Conservation Commission. And like I said, we just got our task force underway, and it's going to be fully separate from the CC. And it's going to be larger and hopefully more stakeholders and more community engagement, but we're starting from scratch. But we also, similar to Hurley and what Kristen said, we've got we're closing up a review group that's been reviewing the entire zoning code for the town for the last year. And that also has recently sparked some conversation about redoing the entire comprehensive plan. So we also have quite a lot that we're gonna wanna talk to you about.
Great.
And Jen.
My name's Jen Rubo, and I'm from the town of Unionville in Dutchess County. I'm also on the CAC, and the CSC is brand new, and also the CAC is also only just a couple years old. It's interesting, actually. I was talking to our town supervisor the other day, and she said that the reason she wanted to get the CAC started was because we have a large town park, the Tighe Park, which is the largest town park in the state of New York. And part of the mission of that park is conservation. It was donated to the town with the idea that it would be for recreation and conservation. And she said, and we've done nothing on conservation so far. So she started the Conservation Advisory Council a couple of years ago to help with that. But we're working on a natural resources inventory right now, and just trying to figure out what else we have to do. Yep.
Good, thank you everyone, that's wonderful. So it sounds like you're all very active volunteers. Thank you for doing that. It's like what makes communities run. Let's see, so Paige, is it all right if I share screen?
Go ahead, yep.
We're all learning how to like navigate all these new worlds of presentation. Hopefully someday I'll get to meet with you all in person. Hope that's going well in your community. So just, what we're going to cover today is just an overview of technical assistance for municipalities. And we're going to tailor the discussion a little bit around, it'll be high level, but we want to focus on moving you in the direction that helps your communities achieve its goals and implement the plans that you're all working on. It sounds like you're all in a lot of different places as far as community development efforts. Briefly, our objectives for the session will be to learn what technical assistance is, and how we can use it to advance the community's goals, and then have a basic understanding of what a feasibility study is, have a basic understanding of the grant funding process, and then learn how both of those processes can help improve outcomes in the grant funding process. Again, just circling back on being focused on achieving those goals for implementing plans. And implementation is really what we want here. It's great to get certified as a climate smart community, but we really want to see you be successful in achieving actionable outcomes that move the dial in your communities to drive them towards climate readiness and resiliency efforts. Just a little bit about us. I know that we got a great introduction from Vanessa, and I appreciate that. And I want to thank the Local Champions program for giving us this opportunity to come and support your communities as you build that resilience. A little bit about our firm. We were founded in 1911. We have over 400 team members, and we were started actually as a municipal firm in Western Massachusetts. Our very first client, the city of Holyoke, is still our client today. And so we really value building relationships with the communities that we work in. And so I'm excited to learn more about your community. I have worked with some of your communities, and we'll have to share some stories later about who we know and where different projects have gone over the years. We're a multidisciplinary firm, so we cover all aspects of environmental planning, environmental science, coastal resiliency, permitting, civil and municipal engineering, building systems engineering, landscape architecture, and then GIS and asset management. And then, as for myself, I've been working with Tighe Bond for just about 5 years. I'm a vice president in the office, in our Rhinebeck office. And I've had the pleasure of working in the Hudson Valley and Eastern New York, Western Massachusetts, and Western Connecticut for just about 22 years. I'm really excited to do an acknowledgement of lands. I had this discussion with Vanessa a couple of weeks ago, and this is actually the first land acknowledgement that I've done, and had to do a little bit of research to learn about the process, and it's been really educational and insightful. So I live in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. If you're familiar with where Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York all come together, I'm right in the southwest corner. And Great Barrington, the town I'm in, is on the indigenous lands of the Mohican peoples, whose land stretched originally from Lake Champlain south to Manhattan and included much of the Hudson Valley as well as the Berkshires of Western Massachusetts. In 2019, our town began a process of educating and understanding the deeper history of the town. And through that process, they provided resources to the town and to residents of the town to help us understand that history. And so I offer an acknowledgement that's developed from those educational materials that our home and our town are on the traditional lands of the Mohican peoples. And I express my gratitude for that land and for those who've come before me as ancient and modern stewards of that land. And I strive to learn more about the history as well as how I and my family can become better stewards of that land and provide for a more sustainable and equitable future for all people in our community. So in that context, and in the context of the Climate Smart Communities program, we want to have a little bit of a discussion about why are we all here? And listening to your introductions, it's clear that you guys are passionate about where your community is going and what outcomes your communities will achieve. And so we're talking really in general about community development. And so what is community development? There's lots of definitions for community development, but I like this definition, which is an amalgamation of different resources that I have at my disposal. But basically it's to build a social fabric to provide an equitable opportunity for housing, infrastructure, the environment, and economic development. And in our context, we're really focusing that around how climate relates to those issues. And we're focused on sustainability and that triple bottom line, which some of you may be familiar with. So that's your economic success, your environmental success, and your community equity success. So another way of putting it is people, place, and profits. In addition, we want to also focus on resiliency. So that's building capacity to manage change in systems. And that can take a lot of different paths. We could be focused specifically on infrastructure. We could be focused on the social fabric in our communities. And in our instance, I think you guys would probably be thinking broadly about a range of potential areas where resiliency applies, ranging from the health of people in your community to the health of waterways in your community. We also want to use this community development opportunity to understand risk management. So that's knowing where we have vulnerabilities and preparing plans that can help us mitigate those risks and implement the community goals. Technical assistance. So this is another sort of jargony term, high level, very broad brushstrokes. The UNESCO organization has this nice definition for technical assistance, defining it as a non-financial assistance, which is provided by various specialists at either a local, state, or international level. And it takes the form of sharing information and expertise, or instruction, skills training, or transmission of working knowledge and consulting services. It may also involve the transfer of technical data. So just setting us up for the discussions we'll have in future sessions. Really, how can we help you achieve your goals? And even before that, how can we help you identify what information you may need to gather and how to form maybe broad ideas into more tangible projects that can be broken down into achievable tasks. Technical assistance can come from a variety of different places. So, in this context, we're here offering technical assistance, but other places where you can find technical assistance, maybe through state or county funded resources. So county planning departments, each of you, I've worked with each of your county's planning departments, and they are wonderful resources. We've got Patrice Perry, who's a great resource in Columbia County. In Dutchess County, they have a number of planners. Each are broken out and serve a specific number of towns within Dutchess County and can offer technical assistance. So we may need to reach out to Dutchess County specifically for each of your towns. And I do not remember offhand Northeast and Unionville who your county planning representative is, but they're there and they're wonderful for helping with things like GIS data and helping understand funding opportunities, but also providing support when we get to that grant phase and we're looking for letters to show support for different grant funding efforts. State agencies also have a number of individuals who are available to provide technical assistance to answer your questions. And it's really just finding the right person depending on what type of project you're looking for. But I've always found, the folks at the state are really helpful in being a resource for you, and they want to see you achieve your community's goals, particularly around these statewide initiatives like climate smart communities. Other places where you could find technical assistance might be from different nonprofit organizations. So it's, you guys are working with Cornell. The cooperative extensions are amazing resources, soil water conservation. So depending on what your activities are, they can be great resources. There's non-governmental organizations. We've got an amazing network of nonprofits in the area, entities like Scenic Hudson, the Open Space Institute, and some of the local land conservancies are really great resources for technical assistance. We've got regional planning agencies, and I understand you guys recently heard from the Capital Region Planning Commission. They are great resources for getting information on different specific topics out. And education, higher education institutions. So I know Rhinebeck, for instance, is working with on a resiliency effort with Marist College. Cornell has been a great partner in the state of New York as far as understanding climate resiliency issues. So there's a variety of different institutions out there that can be tapped for support. And then last, but hopefully not least, private consultants like myself. We are obviously doing this as part of our work. And so a lot of times our efforts are grant funded. And we also offer pro bono services for different communities. This is a myriad of people out there to help you. So I have always looked at technical assistance as a process. There's a lot to take in and a lot to synthesize, and hopefully that moves you in a direction to identify objectives, create a project, or work towards solving a problem. And so we're going to look at three basic steps. So first is gathering information. The next is sharing information. And lastly is information analysis. And technical assistance is really a two-way street. So as much as, like right now, I feel like I'm only going in one direction, just sharing information with you guys. But as we move into the workshop session where I'm working individually with you, we'll want to have a lot of back and forth dialogue. But I'll be relying on you guys to do a bit of the information gathering as we move into that phase so that I can help understand what sort of outcomes you guys are really working towards. So as far as gathering information, in your intros, you gave me some insights into what your communities are working on already. And so that's very, very helpful. And so some of the high level questions we want to ask ourselves as we're engaging in this climate smart community process is, what sort of information does my community have already as far as setting goals for climate issues? Have we done anything? Are we starting at square one? Or do we have a network of other planning documents that maybe help guide and support some of our goals for our climate smart community process? So I'm not sure, and I'll want to get into it with each of you where you are in your process. But sometimes there's just a series of public meetings that are held to start working on progressing a plan like a climate smart communities plan. Sometimes there's been formal community visioning sessions or other community-based planning exercises. And you guys obviously named a few of those that you already have underway, things like comprehensive plans and waterfront revitalization plans. There's other places though, other plans and maybe things you might not think about so obviously as being related to your climate smart communities plans that may provide supporting information as you're working to set your climate smart community goals and move towards developing plans for implementing those goals. Some common plans that may be occurring either at your town or village board level would be your capital improvement plan. Typically that's more of a long-range budgetary planning tool that's used by the town board for establishing your budgets over a 5-year period. And usually they're looking ahead at bigger capital expenditures like maybe drainage improvements or bridge replacements or equipment replacements that might have to occur in your community. So we want to think about where in our community we already have resources that we can tap and leverage for your climate smart plans. Another one, I don't see as many of these in New York as we do in other states, but the asset management plan, if your community has engaged in an asset management evaluation, that can be a very helpful plan. Those asset management plans typically categorize all the assets that a municipality owns and then looks at their current condition and their remaining life, and then provide some projections on replacement costs. And that can be a useful tool for identifying where you might need to have expenditures and where you would then also have opportunities to make resiliency improvements to infrastructure. Some of the communities have undertaken hazard mitigation planning. A number of years ago, this was coordinated through the county planning agencies, and each of the towns have an appendix within the context of the county hazard mitigation plan. There was a pretty robust effort both in Ulster County and Dutchess County, so we should be able to pull those plans up and take a look at them. There's a sea level rise analysis. You may be familiar with Scenic Hudson's sea level rise mapper for particularly for Christina there in Germantown. There are some projections on sea level rise, and we want to factor those into some of your climate smart goals as you're looking at improvements down along the river. There's demographic data. So soon we should have some new census data, but for now we're working off of the 2010 census data. And that is just a treasure trove of information regarding the demographics of your community, and helps you understand where you are as far as median household income, which is often a key requirement for ascertaining your eligibility for some of the grant funding opportunities. And then, you know, certainly this isn't last, but it's last on my list here, geographic information systems. So this is also commonly known as GIS. The state of New York has been rolling out a pretty robust GIS information system that provides high-level analysis of a wide variety of physical and environmental characteristics in your community. So that's sort of like a first level tool that's available for you as you're looking at potential climate impacts. But there are also efforts both at the county level, and it sounds like some of you are probably working at the local level with your natural resource inventories to develop the data around the existing conditions in your community, and keeping that information in a GIS system starts building a database for your community that can be a very useful tool as you're doing your planning for climate resiliency. So once we gather the information, that's the first step, and then we want to share the information. So I want to work with you guys to understand kind of who's on your team as you're working towards your climate smart goals. You know, typically we want to encourage, and it sounds already like some of you are doing this, to get the buy-in of some of your municipal officials. So, you know, it's great to have a champion in your supervisor or your mayor, and those people can go a long way to rallying community support around the climate goals. Volunteers, I assume you're all volunteers, and having an enthusiastic group of volunteers, but also a group of volunteers that maybe have some diverse background is really helpful. I work with one community in the Hudson Valley that has just got a treasure trove of IBM retirees, and they are both committed and very good at management and have been great resources in your community. So, you know, it's great to have a range of different viewpoints, and someone who maybe is a good writer and who's got some time to help with the research efforts that often are required for some of our small communities to make headway in these types of projects. And then technical resources. So again, you know, if you've got a consultant on board in your community, they may be a technical resource. Or if you are lucky enough to have like a municipal planner in your community, they can be a technical resource also. When we have our first technical assistance session, what I'd like to try and do there is get to know you guys a little bit better, understand your team, understand your objectives for pursuing the Climate Smart Communities program, and then review that information we were talking about in the last slide. So what information do you already have? And then start to use that information to identify your projects and communicate kind of the bounds in which we can develop those projects. So, you know, do you have budgetary constraints? Do you have time constraints? Things that we want to be respectful of so that we can be successful in achieving our goals. The other thing, when we're setting goals, we use the term SMART goals. Some of you may be familiar with this. This is sort of like a business management practice, but we try and make sure our goals are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound, so that again, we're biting off only what we can chew and setting those goals so that we can be successful with the outcome. So you know what, I'm going to back up for just one second because there's one other point there. So we'll spend our first session together in this sort of share information phase where we'll have some dialogue about what you're trying to achieve, what information you have. But when we leave that, that first session, we'll have some homework. I'll have some homework that I'll need to do to sort of dig into some specifics that maybe need a little research to help you guys be supported in developing your plans. And you guys will have some homework to maybe identify some additional resources or engage maybe just additional folks at the town board level to help support projects. But we'll leave that session with some homework so that when we come back for the next session, that'll be our analysis session. So our second session will want to clarify and define the projects that you want to develop and identify basically whether or not we've come to a fork in the road in our process. You've identified your project, and now what do we do? Can we proceed with the existing resources that you already have? Or do we possibly need to gather some more information, conduct a feasibility study, better define the project and get a handle on the project? So our analysis phase will be undertaking basically we'll be trying to answer 4 questions. 1, can we clearly define our project? Do we know exactly what we want to do? That's very important. 2, do we have the data to support the decision making? And so I imagine the way most of your boards are working is you're coming up with the ideas, but then you're going to need to get an endorsement at the town board. So we want to make sure you're ready to answer any questions that may be answered. And then with those projects that have been defined in your Climate Smart Communities plan, we want to identify if there are any remaining important questions that need to be answered, or if you can go ahead and take immediate action. So I was just discussing with Paige and Vanessa for a couple of years. I was on my community's Green Communities and Energy Reduction Plan Committee, which was a program that was run through the Massachusetts Department of Energy and the Environment. It's very similar to Climate Smart Communities. But what we ended up doing with our projects as we identified them was put them into a matrix where we listed out all the projects that we wanted, and then we ranked them 1 through 4. 1 being things that are low-hanging fruit that we could do right away, that we could implement really without any big resource expenditures, or without having to do any further study, all the way up to 4 things that we're going to take several years to sort of get our ducks in a row, build the budget, maybe get a grant. And that's been a very helpful tool for implementation, because in the first few months, we were able to go into all the municipal buildings, for instance, and put in occupancy sensors just to save on energy usage within our municipal buildings. Some of the bigger timeframe projects were things like our municipal fueling station. We wanted to get what's called a gas buoy, which is a system that uses a key card rather than just lets any of the municipal employees go anytime to the gas pump and take whatever gas they want. You had to have the key card. It could only be keyed to a municipal vehicle, and that saved on our fuel consumption. So again, creating that matrix and understanding whether you can just proceed right to implementation or you need to take a step to do further study is very useful as far as moving yourself to successful outcomes. And then lastly, do we need to apply for a grant or do more analysis? So that's where a feasibility study comes in. So what is a feasibility study? Are you guys familiar with feasibility study, or if you had to have them completed previously? So feasibility study is sort of commonly used in consulting. It's used in lots of different industries, but from an engineering and planning consulting standpoint, the way we approach it is, we're working with you to identify an idea, a project, a problem, and then determine the viability. So we want to define that problem or project in the context of your community and its specific characteristics. And then it's sort of a feedback loop where we evaluate possible solutions. Sometimes there's an alternatives assessment, and we want to identify things that might be barriers to completing the project or problem. So for instance, would be, let's say you have flooding at your waterfront park and you're going to install a stabilized shoreline. But you can't just go out and get your DPW to install a bunch of rocks on the river. You have to go through a permitting process. So we want to identify those things as barriers. And when you have those barriers, a lot of times there are time constraints, which will affect your schedule. And then we want to gauge the sort of strengths and weaknesses of the alternatives. And from there, come up with one that has the best characteristics to fit your community. And then using that information, develop some budgetary costs and schedules for implementation, so that basically what you're getting at the outcome is the necessary information to communicate clearly with the community about this idea or project, and have enough factual information to develop the necessary buy-in at the community level. Feasibility studies, often communities will hire a consultant to complete the feasibility study. That consultant may be paid by the community for those services. There are also instances where grants may be procured to actually complete the feasibility study. A lot of times what I've found is, particularly with the New York State Consolidated Funding Act, which is the state's sort of high level statewide grant funding round, sort of the big grant funding round that has been in place for the last few years. The state is looking for communities to have a certain amount of skin in the game. And so having a community show that they've expended some funds to conduct a feasibility study in which they define their problem and develop their budget and understand what the barriers are, and they know what the schedule could be, is generally sort of that first bar that needs to be crossed when you're applying for a grant. And it just shows that there's a level of commitment in the community. So, very high level, what is a grant? So a grant are funds that are provided to support a portion of project costs. So whatever project you've developed will have a fixed cost to it. And you know, these projects will take some degree of funds to implement, and the community will have funds and the grant will have funds. Very rare instances, there's 100% grant funded projects, but typically the grant funding agencies or even private entities that will provide grants, they want to see some degree of community matching. Those ratios vary very widely. You know, it's common to see a 50-50 grant. It's common to see a 75-25 grant where the grant may be 75% and the matching funds are 25%. Really just depends on the particular program. Grants have just sort of a general process of determining eligibility. So there'll be some criteria available from the grant funding source, which may be a public source or a private source. That eligibility for funds could be dependent on a number of things. So it's important to just read the particulars of the grant funding opportunity. Often the criteria are things like demographics, might be geographies. For instance, unfortunately, Northeast and Millerton are in the Housatonic watershed and not in the Hudson watershed. And so when we have grant funding opportunities for certain resiliency programs, they might be limited only to those communities that are located within the Hudson River estuary. Good news for Millerton and Northeast, there is a grant funding agency that is more regional to the Northeast that does provide similar funds. It's based on maintaining water quality and good water quality in the Long Island Sound. So I know we've kept our eye out for those funds for Millerton and Northeast. Grants are competitive, and some of them are very, very competitive. So we want to keep that in mind. We try to evaluate the likelihood of success, basically undertake what we would call a go, no-go process when a grant funding opportunity comes up. Is this a grant we think we can be successful in? Because it may take quite a lot of energy, and the community may not have that energy. And so we want to evaluate each grant funding opportunity to figure out how competitive it is. An example of very, very competitive grants are the grants the state of New York makes available to municipalities for park improvements. They're grants offered by the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. They're wonderful grants, but everybody wants them. And so they're extremely competitive. So you want to make sure that if you're pursuing a grant like that, that you've got, a really good, compelling story about why your project should be funded. And Jen, your story of the biggest New York State private park in New York, or municipal park in New York State, that's a great storyline to add to your grant funding opportunities. So we want to just be aware of that competitive nature. And then you're going to want to seek out information to support your grant opportunity. So you're really going to engage with your network. You're going to reach out to your local representatives at every level of government and try and get letters of support. And with the New York State CFA process, you also want to engage with your regional economic development committees and get their endorsement on projects, because that will increase your ranking in that grant funding round. Then we want to review what is the application process for the grant. We want to identify who the applicants are. For New York State grant opportunities, many of the grant opportunities are more successful when you can show that you're engaging in an intermunicipal cooperative fashion with another community. So for instance, I can share is the town of Red Hook, Village of Red Hook, and Village of Tivoli, which are all within the bounds of the town of Red Hook in Dutchess County, have been pretty successful with climate smart community projects that have allowed them to develop a community solar array. And that was recently constructed and recently won a New York State Planning Federation award for collaboration in planning with municipalities. So it's great when you can show you're working with your neighbors to achieve regional objectives. Also in that application process, you want to be cognizant of what your deadlines are. Many of the grants need some sort of formal municipal endorsements. You need a resolution passed at a board meeting, and those resolutions can take some time, and your towns only meet once a month or twice a month, so it's important to know how their meeting cycle is going to fall into your application deadline. You want to develop a good, compelling narrative. You want to pull together the supporting documents, and you want to understand how much money you're asking for and what the cost sharing arrangement is going to be. And then lastly, understand those grant funding cycles. So sometimes we have an idea for a project or we have an immediate need. It may not make sense to apply for a grant if we think that project needs to be done this year, because the grant funding cycles work kind of with a 1-year lag. So, you apply for the grants are announced, and then you are needing to wait a period of time before the grant funds become available from the state. And so you want to factor that into your overall schedule for your project. Just real briefly, I know this is very small for you, and I apologize for the small nature of the text, but this is a typical grant opportunity summary that we put together for our clients. So we identify the grant program, and then we identify these following categories, which I'll just read to you because you may not be able to see it on your screen. So the funding goals, so there's an objective that's set by the funding agency, the eligible recipients, so who can apply for that, the eligible types of projects, how the funding can be used. So some are only used for studies, others are used for construction. What are the pre-application requirements? How much funding is available? If the state of New York comes out and says we only have $1 million available for 62 counties in the state, well, maybe we don't want to focus on that one. What are the funding criteria and how will it be scored? What are the match requirements for your community? And then what are the match types? So match types are things like, does your community have to kick in cash, or can volunteer efforts, in-kind services be provided? And so that's just, as grant programs come out, we usually do this summary each year in coordination with the CFA program. And then how can we use technical assistance process to improve those grant outcomes? So really what we're doing is we're focusing in on your objectives and clarifying those objectives. We're identifying what resources you have in your community. We're providing supporting data. We're identifying costs and sources of funds, and we're supporting that process of community engagement and outreach. And with that, our ultimate goal is implementation, but this technical assistance process is helping you gather the information you need to make decisions in your community. So with that, we look forward to working with you. I've got my contact information here at the bottom of the screen.